Hi, everyone. My name is Mahadeo Sukhai. I am the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of IDEA-STEM. I want to talk to you today about what is a scientist. There is an old proverb, I think we all know it, never judge a book by its cover. But problem is, humans do this all the time in many, many different ways. Surface appearances and our impressions of surface appearances go a long way in today's world. But what happens when surface appearances don't tell the whole story? This puzzle manifested itself for me throughout my career via a different but related question. What's it mean to be a geneticist? Or more generally, what's it mean to be a scientist? I've wrestled with this question ever since I set my sights on becoming one, and since I began to realize that I might have to do things a little bit differently. When I was in graduate school and doing advanced training as a postdoctoral scholar, I used to have help in the lab. That meant I didn't always do the specific techniques that I was supposed to know. I did need to know the theory, and I needed to be able to troubleshoot based upon the descriptions that the technician helping me were going to give me if there was a barrier. In many ways, this meant I was more intimately aware of and intimately familiar with the techniques, how and why they worked or didn't, and what they did. But I wasn't the one actually doing them. Did that mean that I was somehow less of a scientist? Now, the answer to this question gets at a very core principle, not just about who and what a scientist is, but also what it actually means to, in air quotes, do science. And because everyone's perceptions are just a little bit different, when we are confronted with someone who aspires to be a scientist but doesn't fit those ideas, we start to think, well, maybe they shouldn't be a scientist after all. Here's how this works. Take a moment. Picture a scientist in your mind. What visual bubbles to the surface? How many of you are imagining a lab coat right now? Safety goggles, some sort of bubbling chemical, perhaps, in a beaker. Let's be really honest about this. How much of our image of a scientist resembles Professor Snape's potions classroom from Harry Potter? So, if that's our image of a scientist, complete with Eye of Newt, it comes with corollaries about what scientists do. Scientists do experiments involving chemicals and involving things that might explode. We mix things together. We stare down the eyepiece of a microscope. We look through the eyepiece of a telescope, or all sorts of other things that might have actually been true 50, 100, 200 years ago, but probably are not actually true today, except when we are learning the first principles of something. The problem is, though, that that's our perspective of science and scientists. It remains our perspective of science and scientists, even for those of us who are actually scientists. We get stuck on that image, which means we get stuck on how to really measure what a scientist does using these first principle elements. We fixate on them almost. And while this measurement may work in grade school science, K to 12, which, by the way, is debatable, but that's a different story, it doesn't always make sense in graduate level training. In other words, it doesn't always make sense when the rubber hits the road and we're actually teaching students to be scientists. For example, a lot of science is automated these days. We rarely look down the eyepiece of that microscope anymore because most microscopy is computer aided. Same thing with telescopes. Another one, we simulate outcomes a lot these days. A lot of science, think climatology, is done by computer modeling, by taking current conditions and asking, what if this changes? What happens if that changes? What happens if we do this third thing over here? What happens when we do them all together? Or another one, we do tons of team science today. Large teams sequence the human genome. Large teams crack the genetic code of cancer. Large teams, or I should say the genetic codes of cancer. Large teams worked on understanding the genomics of and the immune defense responses for SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus. Large teams are responsible for most discoveries in astronomy and physics. And yet, the myth of the one scientist is driven deep into our subconscious, partly because of Frankenstein and his monster, partly because you can't award a Nobel Prize to more than 3 persons, partly because of The Martian and Project Hail Mary, partly because of Sheldon and Amy from the Big Bang Theory, and all sorts of other examples. Policies on academic rigor are all based on this principle that science and research are best and most purely done in isolation by individuals, so that anyone who does work together with others is either cheating or not a real scientist. In all of these scenarios, the traditional perspective of scientists in lab doing scientist things doesn't actually apply. But the people who do work in those ways are still scientists. It's hard to envision this. Science is really about curiosity and discovery and about asking questions. It's a very abstract thing. We ask why a lot. We ask how a lot. This, by the way, is why toddlers are actually the best scientists. They ask why and how about everything. Their curiosity is insatiable. Science is about trying to understand the world through whatever lenses we can bring to bear. Science is about making guesses. We call them hypotheses. Testing them, analyzing what those tests tell us, interpreting those outcomes, telling the world what we found, doing it all over again. The testing, the experimenting is one component of that journey of discovery. It's an essential component, but it's not the only component. And in many ways, because the how of experimentation has changed and evolved so much, that testing, that experimentation doesn't have to be the thing that we fixate on anymore about science. An essential requirement is something that must be necessarily done in order to achieve an objective. Again, arguably carrying out an experiment, perhaps performing a technical operation, is essential to someone's role, but to be a scientist, you have to necessarily think through the thing that you're trying to do before you do it. You have to understand how to interpret the results and analyze them and figure out what they're trying to tell you. And then if it doesn't work, you have to figure out how to do it again, right? And why it doesn't work, right? And you have to take all of this and help you understand the world. And so I'm going to suggest to you that all of those are more essential than doing the experiment in isolation. There are jobs where doing the experiments in isolation, that's the job. There, that's an essential requirement. But in the totality of being a scientist, perhaps not so much anymore. So I am a scientist, not somehow less of one than my peers and colleagues, but rather, and with deepest thanks to all of those who served as my techs in grad school and as a postdoc, just a different kind of one.